Farfa, I'm so happy that you have decided to join me for the inaugural long-form video on MBT Elestrals. And can I just say what a pleasure it is to be making such an innovative and refreshing piece of content. Card game player tries to rate card from card game he does not play. I think this is really going to breathe some new life into the community. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm just happy to be continuing Raran's legacy. Hi, Raran. Shoutouts to you if you're watching this.
Raran, let's get you on here next. You know what? He's been in the fucking mines for Hearthstone content recently. I've been tuning into streams. I lurk, and boy, if you think Yu-Gi-Oh is dying, holy moly, those Hearthstone people.
The side note, fun fact, the highest generating revenue for digital card games is obviously Mastodon, #1. But fun fact, Duel Links, the side game of Konami, I guess at this point, makes more than Hearthstone. So
that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. I remember Duel Links was always a cash cow, but I just assumed when Master Duel started, people would stop playing it. And I guess they have, but the 15 whales that are still subscribed to Decade are keeping it afloat. Anyway, this is a completely alienating video for anyone who is not super aware of how insular the Yu-Gi-Oh community is. So for the new community I am branching into, welcome. This is Farfa. Would you like to, I guess, introduce yourself to the rubes that don't yet know who you are?
Yeah, I'm Elestrals' #1 hater. I hate the game. I think mana systems are terrible. And Yu-Gi-Oh is the dominant force. I'm kidding. I know nothing whatsoever about Elestrals. I actually volunteered to read some rules about it, and this guy told me not to, so this is going to make me look even more dumber as I try and rate these cards and tell you whether or not they're good or not.
I'm going to be honest, the reason I told you not to read the rules is I know your ass wasn't going to read those anyway. You were going to skim them and then be like, what's a spirit? But let me give you the lowdown, if you're not already familiar. So the way that Elestrals works is you do have a mana system, but it is a 20-card deck that you put in your, I guess I would say, extra deck zone, called your spirit deck. Whenever you want to cast a card, spells, traps are called runes, and monsters are called Elestrals. You enchant it with some number of spirits from your spirit deck. More powerful cards need more spirits. So in that way, it is a mana system that you can voluntarily deplete at any time, but it's also your life total. If you take damage, the damage goes to your spirit deck, and those spirits go to your underworld, which is the graveyard. So you want to maintain a healthy spirit deck, both so that you can have a high life total, but also so you can keep casting your spells, if that makes sense to you.
That's actually really interesting. So you don't need to draw it at any time. You can literally be like, turn 1, I'm going to play like a fucking 10 spirit cost card, and that's, boom, half my life and resource for the game, right? You could do that in theory, I suppose.
Not to spoil too much, but there is a deck, Cryo Scorch Turbo, that literally spends 17 of the 20 spirits on the first turn, and they're just like, go. Like, I will do it. It's terrible.
I mean, that's pretty cool, right? So you have the option to play Yu-Gi-Oh, basically, or you can conserve and be a little bit more, conservative with your resources in life, I suppose, depending on what deck and archetype you're playing. And depending on if your opponent does something, you then respond with a higher cost mana to deal with an emergency situation. So that's actually really cool. It's interesting. I think one of the problems with mana games is generally, like, you know, drawing the mana is, like, sometimes annoying. Can you do anything useful for it? Games like One Piece let you use it as attack rather than, what's it called? But you also draw X amount per turn, so it ramps. So Elestral sounds actually kind of interesting, because you can basically go all in if you want. So that's kind of that's pretty cool.
I like it a lot. But I do have to tell you a little bit about the pace of play before I force you to rate any of these cards, because we do the Yu-Gi-Oh ones, we show them Breaker, and they go, that's a 2-for-1, and you go, you moron, that hasn't mattered in a decade. I would say Elestrals is firmly in about 2008 Yu-Gi-Oh territory. It's slow. It will be probably a 7 to 10 turn game every single time, but every single deck has a focused goal. There is one deck in the format I would feel comfortable calling just like Good Stuff Turbo, but mostly decks have something they want to do. Think like Vayu Turbo and Edison, and they will spend a couple of turns getting it to happen. If that helps.
Yeah, that's very important context. Okay, so I have like some idea of where that is, because yeah, you're right. You know, you read Mirror Force and it's like, that could kill like 3 monsters. Oh wait, that's you know, not good since like 10, 12 years maybe. So yeah, I got it.
Exactly.
I'm thinking that's what I got in my mind. 2008 Yu-Gi-Oh.
So we're going to begin with this first one, which I think is going to set the tone for the remainder. This is a card you may have absorbed some information about, even if you know nothing about Elestrals. I'm talking about my boy, the bunny, Astrabbit.
Like an Umbreon.
Just like Yugioh, those two numbers are their attack and defense. You can place these critters in attack or defense position. When this Astrabbit receives one or more Thunder Spirits, that counts both when you cast it, because you're enchanting it with a Thunder Spirit, or if you finagle a way to get another spirit onto it by way of an Elestrals specific mechanic called Nexusing. Some cards permit you to Nexus, which allows you to move spirits around on your board. Whenever it receives one, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add one of them to your hand, and then shuffle the rest into your deck.
Okay. A little bit about attack and defense. I assume is it like Hearthstone where the defense is basically the health, or does it die when it gets hit by like a 3 attack minion? Is that how stats work?
It works like Yugioh insofar as you can play it in attack or defense position, and if it's in defense and you hit it with a 4 attack Elestral, nothing happens. If you play it in attack and it attacks a 2 attack Elestral, they crash. Anything higher and it wins.
So let's figure out a little bit more about the spirit mechanic then. So when it receives one or more, so in order to play this, how do you like play this? It needs at least one, or?
So that little lightning bolt in the center is the amount of spirits necessary to enchant it the first time. So to play this card, just like a normal summon, you would go, I'm going to cast Astrabbit. You'll head to your spirit deck, pull out a Thunder Spirit, and place it under the Astrabbit. Because it has then received a Thunder, it activates as, let's say, an Enters the Battlefield ability, its effect, which allows you to look at the top 3 and grab one. If using runes that permit you to, using cards that permit you to Nexus, or just by using an extra enchantment, the way you would a normal summon, you get another Thunder underneath it, it will trigger again. And it will trigger as many times as it receives Thunders.
Not once per turn, right?
Not once per turn.
So in order to just like summon this, it's like you could just boom plant it as a 2/5 vanilla.
That's
right?
correct. Well, a vanilla
can...
whose effect will immediately activate.
Okay, so it will at least cost 1 Thunder Rune to cast it.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what the context of the archetypes and stuff look like in this game, but just as raw stats, summoning this in defense as a 5 defender seems okay. That then allows you to basically immediately on summon just duality. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, add one to your hand, just add a guy, so that's, you know, cycling and getting through to your win con, whatever it might be part of your deck. So yeah, I mean, I feel like this isn't too bad. I mean, it reminds me kind of I mean, it just like, not like the boss monster, not like a big attack or anything, just something that gets your deck going, starts your engine, and just essentially builds some tempo and, you know, ramps up the pace of the game. So it's one of those things where it's like, I mean, you look at like, I don't know, I'm trying to think like of an example in Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's like, you know, you look at like Card Trader and you think like, okay, maybe that's good in like pre-2010 or something. But then it's like, oh, okay, well, you know, modern Yu-Gi-Oh just has like prosperity. So
right.
It's hard to tell if 3 off the top and add 1 is good if there's maybe Elestral cards that are just, you know, the equivalent of prosperity or something. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is a good card. It feels like for 1 Thunder Rune, yeah, you're just cycling your deck, you're building a little bit of tempo, and you're trying to dig for combo pieces or whatever to set up for your future turns, etc. Seems fine. It's not terrible, not game breaking, but just solid, you know.
Okay, so the reason I gave you this card first is this is the best card in the game.
Okay, that good. Sure.
Yeah, so everything you said is completely spot on. It just turns out that this amount of filtering is currently the best thing available. There's no prosperities. Duality is the best potential search spell. There was a period of time when this was in literally every deck. We are now in the 3rd set, and finally there are decks that don't want this effect. But even then, it is arguable in just about everything. 5 is kind of the number to beat when it comes to attack and defense stats. Most aggressive Elestrals cap out at 5. There are a couple of ones that go to 6, but under specific circumstances. So this will almost always survive combat, which means your opponent will have to spend a powerful rune or a removal spell on it, which means that you have gone up 1 in card advantage because it already replaces itself on cast. If they don't deal with it, you can just re-enchant it your next turn and get another draw, so it gets out of hand really quickly. And it had a lot of funny interactions with cards that perform nexuses, which would permit it to trigger 2 or 3 times in one turn. Card was crazy. It still is around. One of the cards that enabled it was banned, the first ever banned card in Elestrals. So if you ever decide to dip your toes into the game, you will see a lot of this guy.
And what does like the border or any of these symbols mean? Like, does the black like mean anything? The bottom left corner, I see there looks like there's like 2 kind of symbols there. Is this anything relevant?
It's stuff like the typing of it, but no, not
Okay.
at present.
Okay, all right. Yeah, okay. Well, if this is the hallmark for best card in the game, then all right, this is laying down the foundations, I suppose.
Okay, let's talk about this next card. Should also look pretty similar to a Yugioh. This is Boombat. This is a 2/1 Thunder Elestral, just like Astra, but it requires 1 Thunder Spirit to enchant it. Its effect text is you can disenchant a Thunder from this Boombat in order to target and destroy an opponent's Elestral. To give you some context, 2/1 is a miserable stat line. Disenchant means remove an enchanting spirit from under it, which, if it's the only spirit under it, will kill the Boombat. And spending 1 to destroy an opponent's Celestial is undercosted. The going best removal spell in the format costs 2, and it's called Earthquake. It's a rune, but this does take the equivalent of your normal summon.
Again, I'm just trying to like wrap my head around how like summoning in this game works. So like to play like, if I want to just play like, let's say like, 3 Boombats in a turn, do I just spend like 3 Thunder runes immediately, or how does it work?
Like old Yu-Gi-Oh, you get 1 spirit action per turn. That can be either
Right, I see.
enchanting an Elestral from your hand, or ascending an Elestral, kind of like Pokemon's evolution, or you can re-enchant an Elestral that's on the field. So if the Boombat survives a turn, you can place another rune under it, then disenchant that rune to destroy an opponent's Celestial, and the Boombat will stick around.
Clearly, you're not playing this thing for the stats, I think is first and foremost. You're basically just using this as what appears to me to feel like some kind of an exiled force. That's kind of the vibes I'm getting from it. So just to recap this disenchanting, basically you have to like, cast a rune to like actually summon it. And then you have to like take something out of your, you have to take a thing out of your spirit pile to actually then cast this ability, right?
So to disenchant, you have to take a spirit from your board. So disenchanting from a Boombat means removing a spirit that's underneath the Boombat. So here that would kill the Boombat. It's almost exactly Exiled Force.
And I assume there's no restrictions here, just any Elestral. So I mean, it could be like, unless it has some, I assume some sort of keyword protection on it, it does just straight up just 1-for-1 delete something.
Yep.
I mean, so again, it's very contextual to how good removal is in Elestrals. Like, if removal is very common and there is like a ton of like smashing grounds and fissures and dark holes and Raigekis, then clearly this is going to feel very underwhelming. So I suppose I'd have to like semi-cheat and ask you like how common is removal?
There is 1 removal spell that most decks play a playset of, and then there's a lot of like back row removal. Think like Compulses, Windstorm of Ataqua, Fiendish Chain type stuff.
Okay, yeah, I'm gonna say that this sucks then. I feel like if there is a decent amount of plentiful answers already, this one is probably going to be somewhat lackluster by comparison, unless your deck just really needs like constant 1-for-1 trading. I assume in the context of the rest of the game, this feels like that this is going to be quite underwhelming. Like, popping a guy is good, but using your summon for this and or your cast, your normal summon, what was the term again?
It would be your normal cast, yeah.
Your normal, yeah. So putting all of that just for this seems like, yeah, I don't think that's very good. So I'm gonna say this card sucks.
Farfa, you genius, you Einstein, you are like Stephen Hawking, but even prettier. Yes, this card is not very good. Okay. Like Exiled Force in 2008 Yu-Gi-Oh, there's like maybe some scenarios where you'd consider it, but far and away you don't want to be spending your normal on an action that could be accomplished by not spending your normal. He does see kind of fringe play, but very fringe.
All right.
All right, continuing the list of cards that is basically just a Yu-Gi-Oh card that you'll immediately recognize, we have Drops of Letha. This is a rune. Think of it like a spell card. It costs 2 spirits to cast. You will just take them out of your spirit deck and put them into your underworld. And it allows you to reveal any number of cards from your hand, shuffle them into your deck, and draw that many cards +1.
So literally just Miruh of Greed, right? But for any card.
Yeah. It's like Magical Mallet if Magical Mallet wasn't ass.
I don't want to say, like... Again, it just depends on, like, the grand scheme of the cost of this thing. Like, how expensive is this in a whole type of 7-8 turn game on average, I suppose, as you said. So, 2 mana, I feel like that's pretty reasonable. You're not going minus for it in the same way that you would for, like, you know, Reload or Magical Mallet or something. So, it is always just going to be a net neutral, an advantage. If going off of what you said earlier about Astrabbit being quite limited in the amount of cycling and searching Elestrals has, then this feels like it's going to be really good, because if the only real access you have to cycling is going to be playing Astrabbit and maybe some other kind of card, then Drops of Letha is probably going to be quite staple. I mean, for 2 mana, or 2 spirit rather, this seems... I feel like that's good. Again, it really depends, I suppose, because what does a full archetype, what does a full deck in Elestrals look like? Is it, you know, do you need to get to specific combo pieces? Are you happy with just trading with the cards in your hand in the same way that you would in Hearthstone with, like, I don't know, Yetis and stuff like that? Is that good enough to just have raw stats rather than having to waste spirit drawing them? I'm going to say that this is a good card just because of the fact that it's a net neutral. 2 spirit doesn't really seem like that much in the grand scheme of things. 10% of your pool total to really fix your hand. It's any number, it's not your whole hand, so you definitely get to, like, sort of centralize and think about, like, okay, I am going to, like, try and dig for this specific card. I'm going to keep this because this is good next turn, etc., etc. So, yeah, in a world where, like, you know, you draw, like, a monster heavy hand, for example, cycling a bunch back seems like this is going to be pretty staple. This is either, like, staple in every deck in the game or just not good for some reason. So I think it's a good card. I'm going to say yes.
I take back everything I said, Farfa. You are a moron. You're an imbecile. I can't imagine that you are able to dress yourself in the morning. This card's terrible. It's quite bad. It is as you expected. It's because you're kind of okay with any card that you draw, in that, like, card quality doesn't vary so wildly that you need to see certain cards. The weird part about this one is, like, let's say you draw a monster heavy hand, right, and you want to ship it back. Well, you also have to draw Drops of Letha in order for that to happen, right? So it's like sometimes filtration. 2 is not a ton of spirits to spend, but it is a reasonable amount. And it feels bad to do that just to go even when you could theoretically use those 2 on a spell that makes you go massively plus, like a Compulse or something. And as
a result, combo decks?
There are combo decks.
There's nothing where it's like...
And there is one combo deck that does play this card, but it's a very specific combo deck that plays it because of some weird incidental synergies it has with the ability to just pay out spirits really fast.
Right, I see. Yeah, I mean, I figured that maybe, like, digging for specific pieces in some sort of combo-oriented deck could be kind of good, but, I mean, yeah, I suppose, as you said, if every card in the game is just fine to draw, then what do you really need, like, the cycling for, unless you're looking for very, very specific pieces? So, yeah, I guess I gotta figure out how to retie my shoelaces.
But to be honest, this could be a card that in 5 years we're like, how did we ever think this was bad? This card's crazy. Here's another one. We're back to critters. This one is called Ignector. So it's a 1/2, again, dog-ass stats. When you normal cast this Ignector, you can, and we have our first introduction of a new term, special cast, it's just special summoning, 2 Ignector from your hand or deck in attack position with fire spirits. That means you do have to pay for them. And if you do, you skip your next battle phase. We are eagerly awaiting the new Joshua Schmidt video. Today I learned about Ignector.
Ignector Runic. Let's see. Kind of weird that you have to pay the cost of the guys you're summoning. Kind of strange. If Tour Guide from the Underworld is anything to go by, summoning a guy from your deck is pretty strong. But summoning just a single copy of itself...
It can summon up to 2, but I should let you know, there's no extra deck. You know, you can't, like, overlay them for anything.
Yeah, so, I mean, I feel like this is just putting a bunch of critters on the field for facilitating other plays. I assume that there will be other spells that complement this nicely, in the sense that, you know, there will be, like, you know, various forms of, like, Icarus attack, tribute to, like, pop a card your opponent controls. Using a bunch of critters for that probably could be quite viable. I suppose that's, like, the entire theme of why this would ever be considered good. There's no extra deck, so you're not really doing anything with the materials, other than, I assume, specifically just sacrificing them to do things. So again, I think in an isolated bubble, this doesn't seem very good to me. Yeah, you're summoning, like, 2 guys from your deck, but they're 1/2s. And like you mentioned with the battle phase, just ramming 3 of these into your opponent doesn't really seem good. I mean, you can't, because, you know, you skip your next battle phase, but I mean, I guess you could, like, wall up with these in defense mode for a particular reason. Maybe use them as blockers, but that just feels like you're maybe delaying the inevitable and also paying in the process. So, you know, as some context of, like, is there a lot of tribute to do thing cards? Then this seems like it would be 100% a staple and good in that type of deck. But that doesn't seem like very great value. So I feel like this is, especially with the cost associated with it, I feel like this might be trying to be deceptively better than it actually is. So, yeah, unless there's a bunch of, like, black mana related magic type of things that involve a lot of tributing and sacrificing to do powerful effects. Insane, otherwise bad. So I'll just go with my gut, and I think this is kind of bad.
This card's terrible. Yeah, I was trying to... It took us a lot to figure out a tour guide that's not good. But the short of it is, there is not any runes that are, like, sacrifice an Elestral, pop 2 cards. He just hangs out. He summons a bunch of himself, which is, like, cool for blocking, except you paid for them, so actually it's not cool for blocking. I think the theory is, like, maybe you can have a bunch of guys on field, and then, like, you get a guaranteed Ascension the next turn, like a guy that you can sacrifice on top of, but that's just not good. Like, there's a million ways to do that.
What are Ascendants? Are they basically, like, tribute summons or something?
Yeah, like Caius style. You place a 2 material Elestral on top of a 1 material Elestral. But,
right. I think if this was free, then this would be really insane, but
exactly,
you know, you're paying for them, so not quite nimble Momonga.
All right, I got one more from the base set, and then we're gonna do maybe 1 or 2 from the 2 supplementary sets. This is Ambrosia. It's another rune, costs 1, and when you activate it, you can return up to 3 spirits from your underworld, which is your graveyard, to your spirit deck. It's a heal spell that heals for 2.
Well, I mean, Dan Keto is garbage, but the thing is, like, Dan Keto doesn't give you a valuable resource that allows you to then use more cards. So, so essentially you're going +2 in spirits, I guess, to your deck again. Gosh. I feel like I'm in a situation where this is absolutely terrible or really good. Like, there's no in between with this. This card is definitely not just mid. I think it's
I would say
sick
that's
or
true.
bad.
I would say that that's true for sure.
I feel like any kind of, like, heal, quote-unquote, deck that's trying to, like, spend heavy amounts of mana early game will probably maybe have better ways to do this. I want to say, like, maybe there's, like, a guy that just, like, costs 1 to, like, summon, and then it just gains, like, +1 spirit. Maybe to, like, really sort of try and cycle back some of that cost associated with it, because right now I really am just kind of getting Dan Keto vibes from this. It does just feel like, okay, cool, I healed +2. You know, the 1 mana I spent on this could have just been used on something that actually advances my game state forward to deal with a threat, etc., etc. Especially when you consider the fact that, I mean... Yeah, so it's, you know, Dan Keto was the first thing I thought of. That card sucks. I'm going to go with my gut. It really does feel like you're just +2 HP. Yeah, HP is a resource, but that doesn't mean you play Dan Keto to start using Solemn Strikes, does it? So I think this sucks.
Well, it's not as sexy as Deanne Keto for sure. But it is 1 million times better. This card is at 3 in every single deck in the game.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although I will admit, it took a while for the player base to figure it out. Initial vibes about this card were like, you probably play a singular copy for the corner case scenario where like you just need a live draw in your deck that could theoretically get you back into the game, right? And then people started experimenting with 2 and then 3, and now people realize this card is crazy. The short of it is, you can often, in Elestrals, make up a difference in tempo loss by spending more spirits than your opponent. Either by cashing out on big runes or just like deep drawing as best as possible. This is a card whose existence in your deck means that you will always have kind of spirits at your disposal. And because, of course, the spirits cast the cards themselves, frequently late games are determined by who has seen more Ambrosia. Because, like, if you just go 1 for 1 the whole game, card advantage matters, but at the end of the day, you will be on 1 and 1 spirit, and if one person can get back to 3, then they can theoretically generate more attackers.
I just wanted to ask, so when it comes to like the battle phase and monsters, does it work like Yu-Gi-Oh in the sense where every monster is taunt, and you can't attack unless you clear monsters?
That is how it works.
And then if I attack you with like a 50 attack monster, do you lose 1 spirit, I assume, or is it...
You lose spirits equal to the number of enchanting spirits under it. So if it's a 50 attack 1-drop, yeah, you take 1. But if it's like a 50 attack 3-drop, you are going to take 3.
Okay, so if I attack you with Astrabbit, I assume that's what?
I'd take 1.
Okay, all right, that's good to know.
Well, let's take a look at a 2-drop now. This is one of a cycle of cards called Liths, a 2-drop called Morolith with the effect... You can normal cast this card, like just cheat out a Monarch, if an opponent has fewer Elestrals in their underworld than you do. And then when you cast this Morolith, you can send the top 5 cards from your deck to the underworld. So I will give you a little bit of context for this card. There is a deck in this like element that does almost always have more Elestrals in the underworld than the opponent. So this first effect will almost always be on, but there is not a deck that really benefits off of milling itself yet. So the second effect is usually just icing on the cake.
But if you're not really getting any benefit from milling, then is it really icing on the cake? Other than I assume there's a bunch of cards in this line of, in this archetype or this type of deck where they all have that type of activation requirement where it's basically like, oh, if your opponent has more Elestrals in their underworld, do X.
Well, each one has a different one. So there's one that's clearly broken. That's if your opponent has more enchanting spirits on their side of the field than you can cast it for 2, and then it pops a rune. There's one that says like if your opponent has more cards in deck, more cards in hand, stuff like that.
Can we normal cast with 2 if your opponent has fewer Elestrals in their underworld than you do? So how do you summon this like normally? How do you cast this like without the cheating effect? What would that entail?
Because it's a 2-drop, you will have to use the equivalent of your normal summon on it and tribute over an Elestral on your side of the field.
So this basically lets you summon without tributing, but you still have to cast the thing, but it doesn't use your normal summon?
It does use your normal summon. It's basically, envision a Monarch that says if your opponent has fewer monsters engraved than you, you can normal summon this Monarch without tributing.
But the real payoff for that really is just like, okay, I get a 6 attacking guy, which, I don't know, if like 5 is the number to beat, I suppose that's pretty good. Then when you cast this, send 5 from the top of your deck to the underworld, just basically just no relevant like benefit to that. I feel like, you know, if we're playing Lights Runs or something, this is giving me Celestia vibes, you know, that's pretty good. Oh, this is, I don't know. The stats really just don't feel that. I mean, I guess like if you're basically normal summoning without a tribute, it's actually pretty good stats, I assume. How relevant is it to actually have that, that requirement of your opponent having more Elestrals in their grave than you, fewer? Probably quite relevant. I assume this line of archetype probably has a bunch of mill. I assume there is a lot of mill in this deck.
There is a deck in this spirit color that does put a bunch of your own Elestrals into the graveyard super early.
Yeah, so I assume that's probably going to almost be live. So overall, I don't I don't think this is a good deck, but I think this is a good card in that deck, right? Like that's kind of what I think here. It just doesn't sound to me like that's a great way to play the game because you're not really getting free resources per se, but I suppose like having this quote-unquote cheating summon out is decent, so I suppose you're probably just always trying to flood the field with big dudes. It feels underwhelming to me, but I feel like it is good in that deck, so yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is a good card.
This card's terrible. That's unfortunate because you came away with all of the right understanding of the card. It's like 6 isn't so big that like you're that excited about it. Since the second effect doesn't really matter, you're just like summoning a vanilla, and the deck is playing good normal summons. Like just spend it on the good normal summons. Even in the deck that can have this effect on live all the time, it's the Morfrost strategy. It is not played at all.
Really? Wow.
It's a card that we're all waiting for a Lightsworn like archetype to break, but at present it is just terrible.
I mean, milling 5 sounds insane if you're playing Yugioh, so maybe we need some more graveyard effects and Elestrals. Underworld effects. It'll happen.
All right, next up, I'm going to show you the first and I think only 3-drop I have on here. So this is going to require some context.
Ooh.
This card is called Cryo Scorch. The reason it's full art is because it's the cover card of a deck. So, Cryo Scorch says when you special ascend into this Cryo Scorch, destroy all runes. You can expend your spirit deck. This means take every spirit from your spirit deck and put it into the underworld to force your opponent to expend 5 spirits. So, when this card is special summoned...
They die if they have less than 5, I assume.
When this card is special summoned, it heavy storms, then you can burn your opponent for 5. At the cost of all of your spirits. To give you some context for this card, this special ascension thing happens by way of this little combo. This deck has a million ways to put its own frost spirits into the graveyard. Then it will summon Cryoling, which, if you have 6 frost spirits in your graveyard, can special ascend to Cryovern from deck, which, if it survives until your draw phase, discards your hand to special ascend into Cryovern from hand or deck. So the short of it is, to get out this impressively powerful card, you need to be way down on spirits, and then your Cryovern has to live a turn. The payoff is this big-ass guy who heavy storms and then burns your opponent for 5.
And that's the only way to special ascend to this? This isn't just like cast 3 and tribute a guy to summon it?
There are maybe other ways to special ascend to it. None of them are realistic.
Okay. So it is like basically, it's a specific summoning condition, right? It's like, you know, something you must be special summoned by banishing a light and dark type of thing, right? Like it requires a very specific method to essentially get to.
It doesn't require a specific method, but none of the other methods are remotely feasible.
14 attack. Oh, okay, so I mean, contextually, like whether this is good or bad or not, the idea behind this, I think, is that you're probably going to be bringing this out near the end of the game once your opponent is on 5 or less to essentially just immediately end it. So expending all of your spirits is irrelevant. Wait, hang on. If you expend your spirit deck minimum 1 and your opponent's on 5, what do you draw, or does it expend until
when you're forced to expend with no spirits in your spirit deck, that's when you lose. So if both players are at 0 and you control a Cryo Scorch, you're going to win because you can attack and they can't burn 3.
So you do need to declare an attack. You can't like just expend and win immediately on summon, right?
If they have 4 or fewer, then you will just kill them here.
Yeah, I mean, there's the big setup, a lot to do here. 14 attack is absolutely massive. It's also optional. I mean, you don't need to do that effect if you don't want to.
True.
So the payoff here is that, yeah, like 14 attacker. Damn. And it doesn't have like protection or anything?
It does not have any protection, no.
So the shitty bat could kill this.
That is correct. The shitty bat could kill it. You may have figured this one out already.
Hey, I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. It's very cool looking cover cards. Gotta be good, but I mean, it's obviously just like too much of an investment to just sit on this guy. So, you know, I feel like the only way you're ever going to use this is specifically to like get that second effect off. I feel like that would just win you the game on the spot. Now, the thing I'm worried about is the feasibility of summoning this, because anything that requires you to wait a turn is always terrible. Like, that is just never good. You have to, like, get into the Cryo Link to then get into the Cryo Vern. Then you can get the Scorch out. Like, that's way too... You know, it's like fucking Phenomenon into, like, Trap Card into Phenomenaga. Then you get, like, the payoff after you then attack, like, 3 times or something. Like, that's the sort of thing I'm doing here. You know, Spirit of the Pharaoh. Activate first sarcophagus, second sarcophagus. Like, this convoluted method to actually get this. I could be overcomplicating it and how easy it is to summon, but the way you described it makes it sound absolutely terrible. Anything that takes agency away from you in a card game is bad. If you have to wait to do something, essentially praying that your opponent doesn't have an immediate answer to your setup, it's completely worthless. So yeah, this thing, absolutely insane. You win the game on the spot when you resolve it. Good luck resolving it. I think it's bad.
It's terrible. It's really bad. Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There is a combo deck in this format that when you mulligan, you expend 2 spirits to do so, and you can do it an infinite number of times. So it will just voluntarily go down to enough spirits that Cryoling is on turn 1. They'll go Cryoling into Cryovern on their first turn, and then flip up an equivalent of Cold Wave on your opponent's turn to guarantee they get to Cryo Scorch. Even that deck is ass. It costs like 15 spirits to get this jerk out. He does Heavy Storm, but your opponent can just, like, even if you use the effect, they can just take 8, like, get back to their turn and smashing ground it. And then you have no spirits. It's a weird situation because Cryoling and Cryovern are independently very powerful cards and show up a lot just because cheating out a 7 attack to Tribute Guy is pretty strong. But Cryo Scorch is terrible and sees almost no play.
It's pretty funny that the baby versions of him are actually better than the main boss monster, so...
This happens a lot.
Cover card.
There's a significant amount of cards. Penterror comes to mind, where like you're supposed to like cheat out the 3rd big guy, and people just stop on the 2nd one. They're like, I'm not doing that.
All right, sounds reasonable.
Just a couple more. Now these next ones are from the set that just came out last weekend called Daybreak. So we're still kind of in the dark about what's good in that set, but I feel pretty confident about these next 2. This first one is. I didn't know they put you in
Eddie.
Elestrals. This is Eddie. This is Edward. He is a 4/1 for 1 water. When he is cast, you can change the position of an Elestral. So that Astrabbit that had 5 defense can be put in attack position. And then when a player casts Rock and a Hard Place, you can special ascend this Eddie to Karabis from your hand or deck. Ignore that. Rock and a Hard Place is not a particularly good card. Eddie is mostly seeing any sort of scrutiny for this first effect. A 1-drop that on cast can change the position of an Elestral.
There's no summoning sickness in Elestrals, right?
There's no summoning sickness.
And you don't like choose blockers and all that kind of stuff in this game, right? You are very much like, okay, I attack this monster, that's going to happen.
Same as Yugioh.
Yeah, so I mean, like, this is very clearly just Tsukiyomi, right? Like, book something that's like really big, then it goes, you know, significantly smaller because of the defense. Arguably against Cryo Scorch, it's almost big enough to deal with it himself. So, I don't know, like, for 1 mana for a Tsukiyomi, it's a body that acts as removal. 4/1, I guess is, like, fine. It's just a question of like, okay, cool. Like this this card clearly has no applications other than, you know, out a guy, right? Like that's all Eddie really does. Considering how it doesn't even like beat like an Astro Rabbit. Well, I guess it does beat an Astro Rabbit.
It does beat Astro Rabbit, yeah.
It goes to 2. So yeah, that is kind of relevant. Yeah, so I mean, basically you're choosing what stat you want to attack versus which monster. I feel like mean, I don't know. Would you say like continuous monster effects are relevant in Elestrals? Is there like a decent amount that you're just like summoning, doing things over multiple turns with?
Trying to think. It behooves you to clear the board every turn, I will say.
Like, yeah, so the question you're asking me really is like, is Tsukiyomi good?
Yeah.
Yes, it just depends on the context of how, you know, powerful Elestrals is around this current metagame. Is it in a position where summoning a 4, like, I mean, don't get me wrong, stats on the board, good, 4, you know, that's probably quite beefy somewhat for a 1-drop that can essentially immediately deal with something. I'm not, like, completely blown away by it, but if we're dealing with some sort of a lower power format, I will go ahead and say that this is good.
This card's great. He's a lovely little lad. Like you kind of intuited, 4-1 is fine. It's really nothing to write home about in terms of stats. But very few Elestrals have a really good attack and defense stat. So it's always going to be able to trade with something if the attack connects. I think a good way to think about it is it's like a Boombat that doesn't kill itself. The most frequent use case for this card, as you kind of stumbled into, was it outs Astrabbit. You could just normal this guy, switch the Astrabbit to attack, and just attack over it. Which is great. It's a fine position to be in. We love him just because of his name and the way he looks. He's a little freak. You know, we love that for him. But he's quite good.
What if his effect was instead of put a monster to defense, you put your opponent like face down on the... Never mind.
yeah. All right. Last one from Daybreak. This is a very new card. This is Specteris. This is a 1-drop lunar Elestral. 4/2. It gains 1 attack for each suppressed Elestral on the field. So I should explain suppression. Suppression is to temporarily negate the printed effects of the card. So for as long as a card is suppressed, its effects will not work. It is not negation. It is like applying a blanket suppression to it, is how it's described. Each suppressed Elestral thing, there are runes and cards that will suppress Elestrals. They range in playability. You would probably play some cards that suppress in the same deck as this card. And when Specteris enters battle with an Elestral, you can suppress that Elestral until the end phase.
So, out with using other effects that also suppress, you're basically almost always going to be on 5 attack with this.
Yes.
I mean, summon a 5/2 minimum. That can also get even bigger if you are playing a bunch of suppression abilities in your deck. Seems quite strong. It's just a question of like how much of a relevant gimmick is this suppression ability, you know, I think is the most important thing to take away from this. Since I would assume that there's probably a bunch of cards in this deck that all say like, you know, on summon, suppress a guy, etc., etc.
Here's what I'll say. There are cards that suppress other cards, but I should also probably mention suppression impacts cards that would trigger, from a Yu-Gi-Oh perspective, in the graveyard. So in Elestrals, cards just trigger relative to the card. There's not like a place that they trigger. So if this card attacked like a Mystic Tomato, it would negate the effect of that card.
On death affixes going on here that also get negated. That's pretty good. It's like stopping a death rattle, basically, right? As well as negating its on-field effect, right?
Yes.
Well, you haven't shown me any death rattle-esque monsters, but I assume there's probably going to be some of them in the game. So, assuming that that is the case, and there will be relevant situations where negating a card is actually very important, and it somewhat is big because it'll probably be like 5-6 plus attack. Seems quite good, especially to prevent any grave effects, so that's really important. I'm going to go ahead and actually say that this is a good card. I wasn't impressed at first, but I think being able to negate things in the process of attacking them, suppress things, probably quite relevant into stopping your opponent's tempo. So yeah, I think it's good.
This guy's great. Yeah, he's quite strong. The 5 attack is a big bonus, and the fact that it could theoretically be more than 5 is nice. It's like a 6 attack 1-drop would be kind of unheard of. you know, I guess crab fans rise up. But this suppression effect does matter quite often. There are a lot of guys, like Cryoling, for instance, that have attack modifiers that if those go away, become really just sort of a loser. It's just kind of an all-around good attacker. He's just a nice guy. And we expect to see a great deal of him in the Daybreak meta.
All right.
All right, last card. This one I've put last because I believe we also don't know if it's any good. It's a card that the Elestrals community cannot decide if it's like playable or not. So I gotta hear your thoughts on it. I think it's gonna really look familiar to you as a Yugist, and it's a Nectar of the Gods.
2 mana, draw 2.
2 mana, draw 2.
So it's a +1.
It
right?
is. It is a +1.
10% of your spirit pool to go +1.
That is a lot. It's not nothing.
I mean, you guys are all playing Ambrosia. You can afford 2 mana. So, nah, fuck it. This is a good card. I'm playing Nectar of the Gods. I'm drawing the +1.
I don't really have anything to say to you because I don't think there's really a community consensus on this card. Some decks play it just because they're kind of concerned about their ability to filter individual cards. Water decks, for instance, just want to be able to see more of their deck, and their card quality is so high that 2 random cards is not that much different than like filtering 2. Decks like Thunder Nexus do get to see a ton of their deck by virtue of like Astrabbit Nexuses, so they don't need this effect, and they already go so down in spirits that it doesn't matter. Some decks play it, some decks don't. We can't decide if it's a staple or not. That's where we are.
I don't know, maybe you guys will be revolutionizing the game soon at some point, where kind of like when Patrick Hoban decided, you know what, Mermel, they just need 3 Reckless and 3 Upstart. We could see a scenario in Elestrals where 10% of your life for +1. Gee, come on, in the context of Yu-Gi-Oh! If there was a card that... If Pot of Greed was in Yu-Gi-Oh!, how many life points would you pay to use Pot of Greed? People would pay half their life, I suppose.
But
like,
what if in order to activate a card in Yu-Gi-Oh!, you had to pay 1,000 life points? You know,
true. That is kind of different, I suppose. Would you play Pot of Greed that cost life in Gold Pride?
I think that would be okay. Yeah.
I don't know. What's the general? Like, what do you think? Is this good?
I think this card's strong. I think this card is strong, but it is hard to. It is really hard to. Like sometimes you get into a position where like you and your opponent have just found a good Elestral every turn, and you keep crashing, and then you top deck into this with like 2 spirits left, and you just go, "This is the worst fucking card in my deck." But sometimes it's the difference maker.
Sure. Wait, if you have 2 spirit and you cast this, you go down to 0. So like, do you die, or is it like 1 more hit kills you?
1 more hit kills you. But you also can't cast anything because you have nothing to cast it with.
That's true. So you wouldn't be able to cast Ambrosia.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. Nectar of the Gods can draw anything, even Ambrosia. Okay, well, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm glad we got our court-ordered card game player play other card game out of the way.
Wait, hold on. Let's do a quick tally here. So Rabbit correct, Boombat correct, Drops wrong. So that's 2-1. Ignectar correct, 3-1. Ambrosia wrong. That's 3-2. Morolith wrong, 3-3. Cryo Scorch right, 4-3.
You got 6-3.
That's pretty good. I'll take that.
That's damn
decent.
good. That's 66%. Yeah. That's nuts.
Let's go. Woo! Farfa Elestrals incoming soon. Listen, as soon as the day you guys get a graveyard effect, call me.
Like an effect you could trigger in the graveyard?
Yep, exactly.
We'll work on it.
Playing Morolith Turbo.
I will send it to you. We will engineer Lightsworn from the ground up.
That card is just kick Coloss. I'm just saying, you know, you guys get a grave effect, that shit's gonna go hard, so.